Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Wednesday, March 16th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. I wanted to make sure we finished our position preview before Eno is turned into some kind of vapor from all the news that is broken. He's being pulled in so many directions that I just wanted to make sure we completed the series before the world sort of
I'm on
pulled it apart.
in St. Louis, Toronto, and Hawaii after this.
I'm sure
And
none
I
of
just
those three
filed
places will
5,000
call.
words.
None of those three will call while we're recording. There's no chance that with all those places being
Oh,
in different
God.
time zones, that
Sure
one of them won't
forgot
call.
somebody.
Guaranteed. So if the phone rings
or
during
that I
the show,
screwed up the time zones. Yeah.
I know you well
Why are
enough
you
to
calling
know
now?
that's a lot of juggling. Three very different time zones, and none of them are the one that you're in. That's even worse.
And
Zero.
I do not use a calendar.
You may want to consider using a calendar.
I've been
Just
trying to. I've been really
friendly
trying to.
suggestion. It is our catcher preview. I have a friendly suggestion for everyone listening. If you are the commissioner of the league or if you have influence of the league, you should speak to everyone, email, send a message, text, whatever it is, and suggest the possibility that if you've been using two catchers in your league for the indefinite past, that maybe it is time to reconsider that and to go down to a one catcher league. And I'm not saying make the league easier. I'm not saying have one fewer player drafted. I'm saying take that spot and replace it with an infielder, just a general infield spot. Any infielder would be eligible for that spot, or a second UT spot. Either of those things would be good. And I think the immediate pushback people give me is, we've always played that way. Yeah, I know. I get it. The game was made in the 80s. It's great. You don't have to change it, but you can change it. And the catcher pool is one of those areas where digging deep for a good second catcher or a not terrible second catcher, more accurately, isn't necessarily the most fun and skillful part of what we get to do on draft day. So this is my brief but very emotional appeal to at least consider the possibility of not playing with two starting catchers in your league if you have the control to make that change.
I have just a tiny bit of pushback. One is, it is the deepest, toughest thing to do. So if you really want to test yourself, finding a second good catcher in an AL only league is just about the hardest thing you can do. Like one that doesn't cost a lot, that's about the hard. You could really, if you just really want to test as far as you can throw your analytical skills, then that's about the best way to do it. And the other one is, and this one's a little bit more theoretical. What if robo-umps come in the next few years and suddenly catcher is an offensive position?
Go back to two catchers then. Throw a party, make the chili from the original Roto drafts as part of the celebration. Like, I'm not saying we have to rewrite the entire rule book. I'm saying let's make one structural change. I'm saying instead of getting out the monocle and going, who's a better AL only second catcher this year? Is it Tom Murphy or Kala Higashioka? Like, I'm saying let's go just find another good player that plays anywhere in the infield, because I think that's a lot of fun. That's all. That's still hard. You're still choosing from the pool of everyone. You can still choose crap players. I choose Victor Robles all the time.
Still choose crap players.
I mean,
it's just more of your choice.
Yeah, and if you said, well, this made the league easier, add 2 more pitcher spots, make it look more like a major league roster, add 3 more pitcher spots, make it 14 and 12. That'll make it harder.
Wow.
Look at the pitching pool with 3 more active pitching spots. Okay. I will stop. I will calm down. I will very politely say I've made my point, and people will hate on me on Twitter.
Not real life. Also, the second catcher in real life does not play that much.
They're not in the active lineup every day. You could require every team roster 2 catchers at all time.
That's sort of what Ottoneu does. It's kind of interesting. There are 2 catcher slots. However, the maximum amount of plate appearances you can get out of that is more like 1 catcher.
I'm going to get a monocle.
Like that.
By the way,
get a monocle.
I still have an AL only draft coming up in a couple of weeks. I need a monocle to figure out who my
the biggest strategy, the biggest question is whether or not, because you can actually see it if you run the auction calculator. You can see that very few catchers have any intrinsic value. Just like if you took the position off of them and were just like, looked at their batting line. Like if you did that for GT Realmuto, even, you'd be like, oh, he's a good 4th outfielder. right? And he's like one of 3 or maybe 2 catchers that has value without the position attached to him. So you have to decide, no matter how deep your league is, you have to just, I think catcher strategy is something you have to decide. Now, if it's a 12-team, 1-catcher league, I think the strategy is super easy. It's just wait. Just grab one of the last ones.
I think you still can benefit from, even in a 1-catcher league, paying the premium. In a 2-catcher league, I think it's important to get at least one good catcher, and good still being a relative term. I see 3 kind of in a cluster of their own, above $20 if you run the auction calculator with the Bat X. Salvador Perez kind of in his own space at the very top. JT Realmuto and Will Smith are all there, pretty close behind him. Their ADPs all within the top 50 or so, based on what we're seeing here in the NFBC over the last 15 days. Sal Perez is coming off of a year where, I mean, it all came together at once, and it happened a lot later than people would have expected. Like, if you'd told me 6 or 7 years ago he's going to pop 48 home runs in a season, I would have said, okay, it's happening like right now. That's not going to happen later because of the usage. I figured the heavy usage, he'd be the kind of guy that would decline pretty hard in his 30s. And instead, he had a season in which he hit more home runs than he did in 2018 and 2020 combined. That was with a lost injury season sandwiched in there in 2019, which is just absolutely remarkable. He's striking out more than he used to, but he hits the ball very hard. What do you make of Sal Perez? Like, I think it's a broader question. Are top catchers worth the price? But is he the best catcher on the board coming off a season that just looks like an outlier, even though his previous levels were very good?
The good is that nobody had more barrels. In fact, he had 25 more barrels than the second most barreling catcher, Mike Zunino. Nobody had anywhere close to as many hard hit balls. The closest was GT Realmuto, who had 100 fewer hard hit balls than Salvador Perez. So he earned every bit of all that power. It wasn't some sort of got lucky just enough situation, which I guess is obvious since he hit it 48 homers, but is worth saying because his previous high is 27. But he hit all these numbers. The one thing I would say is that you would regress barrel rate like any other stat, maybe less than some other stats, but you'd still regress it. So his career barrel rate of 9%, and then his barrel rate last year of 16%, you'd kind of regress one towards the other. I would say that you'd be more likely to come up with something like what he did last year, where he had a 14% barrel rate and 11 homers in what would have translated to 33 homers over the course of the season, full season, 35 homers. So I think he can hit. That's what his projections are for, around 35 homers with a good batting average. Yeah, he's worth it. He's like a $6 or $7 player without the catcher title attached to him. The one thing that just leaves me cold is that he just has, he reaches at everything. And he's one of the worst reach rate guys in baseball, where he's always swinging at something outside the zone. And he's 31, which is exactly when that starts to bite you in the butt. If you look at his contact rates, by reach and so on, right now his contact rate outside the zone has actually started to fall a little bit. He used to make contact rates outside the zone at, like, when he first came in the league, at 80%, even though he was reaching a bunch. And then it dropped to 70, mid 70s. And then last year it was 56%. That's the beginning of a reach. That's what happens with reach rate. You cannot make contact on those balls outside the zone like you used to. So I think it's possible that his strikeout rate goes up, even though all the projections have him regressing towards his league thing. If he does not, make any more contact on pitches outside the zone, which he shouldn't because he's aging, then we could be talking about a guy who's more likely to hit 240 or 230 next year. And then he becomes a little bit more like a regular catcher, even though with a ton of power.
Yeah, it's, better versions of Gary Sanchez and players like that go a lot later. I think the problem I have with Sal in a snake draft is that with about a 15-pick difference, a full one round, if you're talking about a 15-team league, between Sal and then where Realmuto and Smith go, the quality of the player you're getting, the alternative, the opportunity cost in the snake draft is pretty high on Sal right now. I'd rather, if I'm going to take one of the 3 elite catchers, take Will Smith or JT Realmuto around later. No guarantees you get them, of course. Other people might be interested too. But I feel better about the overall build in a snake draft. I think in scenarios where you can just go out and bid up whatever player you want, then sure, I have no problem going the extra buck for
And
Sal, because the hard hit thing you mentioned, this stat blew me away when I found it maybe a month or so ago. Only Vlad Jr. had more batted balls last season at 95 miles an hour and above. I mean, that is a ton of hard contact.
Yeah, it really is. I just have to tell you, man, that plate those plate skills leave me cold. Like a 4% walk rate, 25% strikeout rate that's people have been listening. No, that's not my deal. My deal is JTO Realmuto, and I have picked him in a few leagues. I think I just got him in Barf, and especially in 2 catcher leagues. There's one thing I really like about JTO Realmuto. There are no other catchers that offer you positive value in batting average and stolen bases. There are none, 0. And the only one that gets close is Daulton Varsho, but he is not projected to offer value in batting average, and he doesn't offer as much in stolen bases. Now, if he plays 600 plate appearances, maybe that changes. But just to have be the only one to be a unicorn, that's something I can really dig on. And what's really tough in 2 catcher leagues is keeping your batting average up. It's really hard, because if you go with the strategy of like, you know what, who cares? Catchers all suck. I'll just get 2 guys at the end. And you end up with, even Max Stassi and Eric Haase. And you're like, ooh, these guys barrel the ball. I love it. They're going to hit some homers. You're talking about a 230 average.
Yeah. I think knowing that if you have a 2 catcher league, you're taking some batting average risk there, barring going after 2 very good options. Some people choose to do that. I can totally understand why you might consider it, depending on who's in the room and how confident you are in filling out the other parts of your roster. If you don't have even just one decent catcher, I guess I'd rather take my batting average hit with a catcher sharing playing time with someone else who's at least good in power. Yeah, because it's fewer plate appearances, right? It's not doing as much relative damage to your overall average compared to taking that hit with Joey Gallo, who's an everyday player that might hit 200 with 550 or 600 plate appearances. That hurts you quite a bit more.
It's true. But the flip side is, even with JTO Realmuto on my squad and no batting average risks, I still ended up with just a 271 projected batting average. In fact, was it 264? Why is that? Yeah, let's see. 264. Who are my batting average risks? Brandon Nimmo and Cody Bellinger. And I ended up, and I took Realmuto and Narváez, which are kind of, you'd think, batting average okay catchers, right? I still ended up with 264. To win your league, the benchmark you really want to hit in batting average is 270. And I protected my batting average. So I would say the batting average is a really, really hard thing to protect these days. And it is a hard thing to project, but you gotta, I think that here are the other guys that can help you in batting average, relative to catchers or relative to the league, even JTL Realmuto, Will Smith, Keibert Ruiz, Tyler Stephenson, Alejandro, Kirk. That's the full list.
Yeah, not a position where you're getting much there. If you do get something better from someone else, maybe it's Adley Rutschman, one of the prospects that comes up and plays a lot more. We'll talk about Rutschman here in just a bit. I do prefer Realmuto to Smith for the reasons you mentioned, that more balanced player. I think part of the reason I prefer that, though, is if you're taking Realmuto in a snake draft where he goes, you're passing on someone who runs more, and you're probably leaning a little bit more toward I need a bunch of guys that run a little bit sort of build. So getting the extra handful of bags from him starts to make more of a difference with what happens elsewhere. And I realize you can push pitching later and get other guys that run and not necessarily have to build it the way I'm describing it. But I have found more likely than not, the cost of taking Realmuto that early is needing to be a little more balanced with where those bags actually come from. But Will Smith, I think, is the kind of player that, we don't know what's going to happen with Freddie Freeman. He could sign while we're recording this pod. News is breaking like every 10 seconds right now. The universal DH situation gives me a lot more confidence in Will Smith's playing time ceiling, right? Because when they didn't have that, I felt like there was this pretty logical and concerted effort to keep him from being overworked. We talked about Sal Perez's early career workloads. The Dodgers are not doing that to Will Smith. I think they'd be a little more comfortable pushing him into the 550 or 600 plate appearance range if he can get a decent portion of those not catching, right? He's a good enough hitter where they can justify playing him as a DH.
He's projected to be 30% better than league average with a stick. So, that's well above the 105 WRC plus average for DHs. I have heard from scouts and hitting coaches recently that they think Will Smith is already the best catcher in the game. That includes some defensive aspects that aren't relevant to fantasy, but if you want to catch Salvador Perez, if you want to catch a Salvador Perez type season the year before, Will Smith is probably your best bet.
I would agree with that because I think the only other guy that I think kind of has that sort of in him is a tier 2 guy that brings some injury risk. It's Yasmani Grandal. I think what we saw from Grandal in a partial season because of a knee injury last year, the pace he was on in the second half was a little bit like what Sal Perez did. 23 homers in just 375 plate appearances. We played 93 games. Low average, controls the zone better, walks more than Sal's ever walked. It's always been part of Grandal's game. Doesn't have the reach rate problem. Had a career best O-swing percentage last year at 18.7%. If he's healthy, I could see Grandal being the other guy that ends up kind of popping and playing more like a top 50 overall pick as a catcher than some of the other players people might be thinking about.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing what he did last year because he was not healthy. The knowledge on this 23% walk rate that he had last year is that he was hurt. His knee was hurt, and he felt like the only way he could help his team was by not swinging. And so he had these ridiculous swinging rates, and the lowest reach rate of his career, which was already a low one. And yet he got healthy enough, I think, in the second half where he had the best barrel rate of his career and kind of combined that extreme patience with better health. So you could see a peak season if he retains that approach and stays healthy all season. I think a peak season from him, even though it's a little bit weird to be talking about that at 33, it's just he has all the skills and the ballpark now that just kind of could combine to a peak year. I think a peak year from him would be 255 with 32 homers.
Yeah, and good run production too, because it's a good lineup that he's got with him with the White Sox.
I don't think they're going to push his plate appearances though, because it is a team that has a fair amount of options at DH. I mean, you've got Vaughn there, you've got extra outfielders. I think. Am I right? I think that they're not going to play him at DH that much. He played a little bit of DH last year, but
because of Abreu and Vaughn, it's harder to see a playing time number and his own knee injury where Grandal catches Will Smith. I think Smith being younger also is a huge factor in being more confident in paying the premium to get him. So I do like the idea of getting at least one catcher out of the first two tiers. Daulton Varsho is also in tier 2. Willson Contreras is in tier 2. Varsho, you mentioned him earlier, kind of comes down to plate appearances. I'm definitely on the side that thinks he's going to be basically an everyday guy in the outfield. And I know our friend James Anderson put this out there on Twitter. He thinks this is the last time Daulton Varsho is going to qualify as a catcher in our leagues, which gives you an idea about his expectations for role. Second half last year, Daulton Varsho played at a star sort of level, the kind of level where you would say, yes, he is actually an outfielder who used to catch. That's the kind of player he could be. The speed is actually legit. He's 9 for 10 as a base stealer now, just 430 career big league plate appearances. He's popped 14 home runs. And I think the batting average floor is a lot safer than what we've seen from him so far. The K rates really aren't a problem. I know the O swing's a little high, relatively speaking, but for a guy in his first stretch of big league playing time, I'm not looking at that and saying, yep, that's a problem he's going to have permanently.
Yeah, I could see that. Especially with decent walk rates. He must be seeing the ball all right. He's exciting. The projections aren't super exciting. That always sort of leads me to that quandary of like, am I going to take the leap of faith? here where he goes, and or am I going to trust my values?
Problem because he's going inside the top 90 overall. And it's a little bit like the Salvador Perez problem I was describing earlier, where if you're in a snake draft, you start looking at some of the other names that are going in that range. You're not asking playing time questions about seasoned veterans. You're not thinking about that with Chris Bryant. You're not thinking about that if you're looking at a Cody Bellinger bounce back. So
and
it
like, well, how
becomes,
much more would you want out of Varsho than what do you think you're going to get out of Chris Bryant?
that's the problem. Like, yeah, it comes from a catcher eligible player, but there is still some
question marks,
some performance risk cooked in
and
there.
then if you just run the BATX auction calculator, it pops out at you that Willson Contreras and Yasmani Grandal are projected to be worth $2 to $3 more. In Contreras' case, $5 more in a regular 5x5 league, and they go later.
Yeah,
I think one of the real values here is Willson Contreras, because despite what I said about batting average and stolen bases just coming from Realmuto, Willson Contreras is one of the few that even comes close. You know what I mean? He will steal you probably 3 to 5 bags, and if that doesn't sound very exciting, that's a lot better than the 0 you get from most catchers.
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm kind of in on Varsho as a concept, but less aggressive toward drafting him at ADP. With Contreras, I think you are getting a little more value there. A little concerned, though, that they brought in Yan Gomes because he's the kind of backup that plays more than every fifth day. So I wonder, though, because of their offensive structure, if they actually see Willson Contreras as a DH option, and that takes some wear and tear off him. And maybe that's part of why they brought Gomes in. I thought at one point, though, they were going to trade him because they were tearing things down, but they're making moves. They're making moves like a team that was at least trying a little bit in 2022. So I would assume Willson Contreras stays, but like this group of catchers quite a bit. Kind of like them to Grandal first, Contreras second, Varsho third, just based on where they go ADP wise.
To your point, though, just ran projected WRC plus for the BATX for all of the Cubs. Willson Contreras number 1.
Yeah, he's going to play.
That changes a little bit. There's some breaking news. We're trying not to do it, but Seiya Suzuki is probably going to be right there. But Suzuki's probably not going to play at DH. So Contreras better than Bodie, better than Happ, better than Harold Ramirez, better than Clint Frazier. So I think you're right. I think he's going to play some DH.
Yeah. So keep that
to
in
me,
mind.
I actually might like him a little better than Grandal, because the projections already say he's worth more. There's the possibility of that extra plate appearances, and then he's not coming off a knee injury, and he's younger. So that's a bunch of stuff. As much as I like Grandal, like that's a bunch of stuff in Contreras' favor. $3 in the auction calculator. How many years? 3-4 years of age, no knee injury, some steals. I do like that. I do like shopping there, though. Contreras to me is kind of fun in like 12 and 15 team leagues as the least I'm going to say least acceptable. Obviously you can do less, but I love getting Willson Contreras and feeling like I got a C1, basically like I got an above average starting catcher. I got one of the best 5.
Right.
And I think this next group here shows you how quickly the thing falls apart. Like if you don't take part in the Contreras, Grandal, Varsho grouping, the next group has way more questions than it has answers.
Yeah, that group starts around pick 110, runs all the way down to about pick 200. Only 4 catchers are in it. Tyler Stephenson, Keibert Ruiz, Mitch Garver, who's now in Texas, and Adley Rutschman, who we learned this week actually has a triceps injury. He's going to miss a couple of weeks, so that will.
They also signed Robinson Chirinos, which
he is older than me, I think, or at least
not,
as old as me.
It doesn't need to put a block in Adley Rutschman's way, but it also could, perform to the lie that like we've got a competitive team out there, and we have to trade Chirinos first or whatever it is.
They are not even trying to lie about that. They just needed a backup. They just needed a backup. But Tyler Stevenson's situation, we're going to talk about this on the 3-0 show. The Reds are, for some reason, just dismantling their roster. I mean, they're not going not going to be like Oakland, but they're definitely cutting payroll. And I think that brings the quality of the lineup down. That brings down the counting stats. But Tyler Stephenson looked good in terms of the underlying numbers. They did move Tucker Barnhart pre-lockout to create more playing time for Stephenson. So I'm just kind of curious, what do you think this season brings for him? Is it building on what he was doing a year ago when it kind of sharing that role initially with Barnhart?
Well, it's not a great barrel rate, and his max DV isn't great, so I don't know if he's got great power, but he should probably have at least average-ish power, which compared with really good contact skills and a good sense of the zone, I think, makes him a kind of interesting hitter. It's kind of rare for a catcher. It's not the normal skill set you have for a catcher. Normally, you have, I think for catchers, you normally have, I would say you have an average of 25% strikeout rate, right, and like an 8% barrel rate, where half these guys are just like, hey, I'm just swinging for the fences every time I'm out here. This is a little bit more of a controlled approach, which could lead to a better batting average. So he's in that Ruiz, Contreras, field that's after Realmuto that could maybe not hurt your batting average.
Yeah, I think with Stephenson, I think I just feel better about his floor than I feel about Ruiz's floor short term, since we've had an opportunity to see what happens with 400 plate appearances. The average maybe comes down a little from where it was for Stephenson. Long term, I could see Keibert Ruiz being a very good source of batting average in the big leagues. He's never had an issue with strikeouts. He walks an acceptable amount. And playing time wise, I don't really see a backup that's going to play more than occasionally there. So the depth chart kind of lines up well. The way that lineup is built, he can end up hitting about 6th or so a little higher. That's with their catchers as well. So I see things I like about Ruiz, but when you factor in home runs in Cincinnati, that extra boost being there, even if there's some underlying questions about Tyler Stephenson's power, I think it's easy to see him getting to his projection with the open path to playing time and with that ballpark.
And there's those same questions about the power for Ruiz. I mean, you got these outsized numbers in AAA in 2021 in LA. But other than that, you have a very similar statistical profile to Tyler Stephenson, good, not great ISO numbers in the minor leagues. And then he came up and hit like 2 barrels last year. So I'm not trying to say that, fait accompli, we know exactly what Ruiz's power is, but that's the point. We don't know what it is. I think we know that Tyler Stephenson has at least league average power.
Right. And I think with the ground ball rate for Stephenson spiking last year relative to where it was like at AA and even at high A, I wonder if there's a little bit of room for improvement for him there as he continues to adjust to big league pitching this season too. The other players in this group, I mentioned Rutschman and Garver. I mean, Garver in Texas, I tweeted this when the trade happened. I think with Garver, it's a very slight downgrade in terms of home park, but not much, not enough to even really like change his value. And I think it's probably a question of, well, just how much more can he play? Because Mitch Garver's playing time in the past has been lighter than you'd like it to be. He's a little older than you think.
Never crossed 360.
Yeah, he's 31 already. Jonah Heim's a good defensive catcher. Like, does anything change about either the setup with the supporting cast? Maybe that's even a wash too. The park, the role, to where you think Mitch Garver is in a better or worse situation than he was in Minnesota?
Who knows if Minnesota was nursing him because they wanted, they thought he would stay a Twin throughout his entire team control years. And so they wanted to make sure he was healthy every year. I kind of don't feel like Texas will have that same impetus as much because he's a free agent in 2024. So they got him for 2 seasons. They want to prove that their whole winning the offseason strategy works. And, they want to show that they've got a good offense. I think that, a guy projected to be 10 to 15% better than league average, who's been 22% better than league average for his career, is going to figure in as one of the best players on his team. I'm looking right now at the Rangers projections the same way that I did for the Cubs. It's not as depressing. There are more good players here. However,
is he top 5 on the Rangers?
3rd.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, he's still good. He's still going to play.
Him and Lowe. I mean, it's interesting because the 2 guys that are there, Lowe and Calhoun. Calhoun projects to be about 7% better than league average. Lowe 12, Garver 13. Lowe and Calhoun are probably also people that could play DH, but I don't think there's an obvious first baseman. So I think Lowe just plays all the time. Maybe Calhoun DHs some days. You don't think that Garver gets all DH days every day he's not catching. That would be a bit aggressive. But I would say that looking at this, Calhoun, like los dos Calhounes, and Garver split DH.
Yeah, so there's enough playing time to spread around there. I mean, I think with
That's an
Garver
extra
being
150 maybe for Garver on top of the 350 he normally gets, so he might get to 500.
I think you might get to 5, but I think you expect 425 or 450, and that's better than what he had. So maybe it's a better situation. Plus the Donnie Ecker factor. Maybe there's something else to be unlocked in the profile, but he doesn't need that. He's already shown good skills on a per plate appearance basis. Mitch Garver's a 256, 341, 494 career hitter. It's actually really good, especially for a guy that can at least catch sometimes. In Texas,
I think he's my favorite in this range. He costs less than the other guys. I do appreciate that Tyler Stephenson's batting average is going to be better. So I think of the four that you put in this range, Garver and Stephenson are my favorites. Based on, am I willing to go the extra 2 rounds to get Stephenson for the batting average? How much do I need it at that point in the draft? What has my build been so far?
What do you do with Rutschman now? Because it's going to be 2 to 3 weeks.
I'm not taking him.
Yeah, it's 2 to 3 weeks before he's resuming baseball activities. Then it's a question of how quickly do they ramp him up? When do they bring him
time
up?
Manipulation.
Yeah, I think all of that is now fully on the table. It was a lingering concern anyway, since they're going nowhere this season. And now this injury just gives them kind of a free pass to do as they see fit with Adley Rutschman's service time. So if he falls into this tier 4 cluster, there's a point at which I'll say, fine, I'll take him. But you have to roster a third catcher, or you have to have an IL spot to actually do it, and that's not necessarily the best use of a precious roster spot if you go this route. So
I mean, you could do something where you took Varsho, and then you take Rutschman, and then you take a really late catcher that you have your eye on, and you're hoping that between those 3, maybe you have 3 players at the end of the season, or you know what I mean? Like Varsho could be good enough to play in the outfield. So
yeah,
I don't know, but I that's still a lot. That's a fair amount of investment in catcher. That plan right there is a fair amount of investment in catcher. Like,
still
why
a
don't
lot.
you just take Willson Contreras then? Or why don't you just take Realmuto then, and then you don't have to do all that investment in catching later. So yeah, I don't like the idea. I don't want a catcher on my bench. MJ Melendez, we'll talk about him later maybe, but like that's pairing Melendez and Rutschman is just putting risk on top of risk, I feel like.
Yeah, I guess if you were going to take a really unique build and double tap Realmuto and Smith at the 3-4 turn, that pick 45 range, you wouldn't have to roster a backup catcher. If one of them got hurt, you'd have to go pick one up, of course, but then you'd have extra spot in your bench to mess with, and you'd have a huge edge at the 2 catcher spots. Don't know if that's pushing too far. Every strategy I've come up with so far this offseason is probably just too aggressive and not a good idea. So
I go middle late. And so this next tier that we're talking about, I will have I go middle late in mono leagues. So like in AL Labor, I went middle late. And I think one of the names that we're about to talk about is on my list. In 15 team leagues like TGFBI and stuff, I tried to get one of the Contreras, Grandal, Stephenson group. It often ended up being Contreras.
Tier 4 is from pick 200 to pick 300. This is a group that includes Christian Vázquez, Travis d'Arnaud, Elias Díaz, who's playing a lot in Colorado, Alejandro Kirk, Mike Zunino, Omar Narváez, the now Minnesota Twin Gary Sánchez, Sean Murphy, an A for now. We'll see what happens when the podcast ends if he's gone. Carson Kelly, Joey Bart, and Max Stassi, who now has Kurt Suzuki back as a backup. So this is a group. I see a handful of players in here that I'm more inclined to draft than the others. Sean Murphy is one of them, because I think even if he gets traded, much like we've said with all of the A's position players, it's probably a better situation park-wise when he goes somewhere else. Playing time-wise, he's a good defender, so the floor is really stable. I mean, if the Yankees made a trade for Sean Murphy, I'd say this is awesome. He's in a good lineup. He's going to play a ton, and he's going to get a big park boost, and maybe we haven't seen his best offensive season yet.
Yeah, and it's totally possible, because it is a little bit weird for the Yankees, as they are constructed now, to be kind of no offense at short and catcher. I could see them addressing both of those and pushing Kiner Falefa and Rortvet into kind of backup roles. That's a little bit more Yankee like. Anyway, Murphy, that's a digression. Murphy has a really good barrel rate. It's just a touch behind Grandal, but ahead of Contreras. He had a 216 average last year, but a little bit of that was bad luck. He had a 240 expected batting average. And I think, the reviews for me are positive in every direction. Like you say, defensively, his approach at the plate. He took a little step back in walk rate last year, but I think that was just a kind of a hiccup on the way to better days. I have him as my starting catcher in Labor, and I'm expecting more of that 240 to 245 expected batting average than the projected 220 to 230 numbers. I just don't see that. If a guy barrels really well, has a good sense at the plate, and only strikes out 25 to 26% of the time, like Murphy does, I don't think he needs to hit 220.
I think the problem with having a target that goes as late as Murphy goes is if you didn't address catcher earlier and someone else gets him, then you're really in a bad spot. He's kind of like the last catcher that I really like for mixed leagues. I know I took Carson Kelly in NL Labor. He's going to play a lot if Varsho's in the outfield. I think he's fine. He's going to be an okay accumulator. Somebody was pointing this out on Twitter.
Behind, though. Yeah.
It gets real bad back there. The problem with Carson Kelly, mashes lefties. He has not been very good against righties. I think the one thing that's kind of a saving grace, though, in that regard is his plate skills aren't that bad against righties. He's not this hopeless,
so he just
strikes out 30% of the strikeout rate guy. Yeah. But it's not a great profile, so you have to keep that in mind. At the top of this group, though, Christian Vázquez, kind of I don't know. I shop at TJ Maxx, so I don't find this to be bothersome, but kind of your TJ Maxx version of JT Realmuto. He's a catcher that runs. Like, it's great. He has some flaws, but I think he played hurt last year. It's a big part of why the power fell off as quickly as it did. Like, if you look at 19 with the rabbit ball and even 2020, the shortened season that we kind of throw aside a lot, those slash lines look pretty similar. Those slugging percentages look pretty similar. So I think there's a little bit of a power bounce back coming from Christian Vázquez. I don't think there's much there to push him for playing time. So I would say if you kind of miss out on the first three tiers and you're starting to panic, Vázquez and then one of the other guys you like in this range can still be enough to hold it together in a two-catcher league.
The nice thing is he makes so much contact. He puts so many balls in play that you can kind of roll the dice on him. You can see the years that he has good BABIPs. He has good batting averages. Why is that? Because he puts a bunch of balls in play, right? Mm-hmm. So, he's projected for, exactly league average BABIP. And so then he's projected for a 250 average. But the error bars on that batting average are quite large, I would say, because BABIP is the one thing that just kind of goes up and down. So if he has a 330 BABIP next year, he's going to have a 260, 270 average, and then he's going to look like Realmuto light. He really, he'll probably get fairly close if he has a good, like another 340 BABIP year, then, you could be really surprised by how close their lines are. However, you want to buy projections and reap the rewards of the luck, right? And the problem is that Vázquez's projections are exactly in line with Alejandro, Kirk, Carson Kelly, Omar Narváez, and Sean Murphy. They're all basically $3 to $4 catchers. And yet Vázquez goes 30 to 100 points higher than all of them in drafts.
Yeah. And the guy that's actually by projection, the next best player is the guy that goes right after Vázquez in ADP. It's Travis d'Arnaud. Who reminds me of Home Goods for some reason. I don't know what I'm just messing around at this point.
And he's got a $7 value. I think it's a bit aggressive because they're giving him 437 plate appearances, and the question is health, right?
Definitely a lot of health questions, right? Concussions in the past, torn ACL years ago, only played 60 games in 2021, and the great season that everyone's excited about was the shortened season. It was 2020. It was only 44 games, and I think there's cheap power there. What he did in 2019, sort of showing everybody that there's still a good player in there despite all these injuries. It's sort of like the Vázquez thing. I can look at those numbers. I can look at the shortened season and convince myself that 2021 is the recent outlier, that there is bounce back potential. The projections, I think, are a good way of level setting. Not that he's going to be a top 5 catcher like he was in the shortened season. No one should expect that. I think the other thing that's kind of encouraging is that Shea Langoliers is gone. Like, I know William Contreras is still there, but I kind of saw Langoliers as the bigger threat to d'Arnaud.
he was the one who was at the alternate site during the playoffs.
Yeah, so I kind of
Not
look at that
Contreras.
situation as one that quietly got a little bit better as a result of Atlanta shuffling. I know Manny Pena is there as a backup. He's a capable backup, but Pena's not the kind of guy that's going to take the starting
No,
job away from Travis
if
d'Arnaud
he's
either.
healthy, he plays. Yeah, I like d'Arnaud. I've got some drafts and holds where my first catchers are, d'Arnaud, Murphy. I have bought in. I do buy in this range. Like I said, Sean Murphy is my first catcher in AL Labor. And I like this range. You're right that Murphy is kind of the least acceptable last one, but I think if you had a strategy with Omar Narváez and Sean Murphy, you might be able to, cover your back a little bit. Carson, Kelly, those three. If you're okay with those three, they're a little bit different. Like Narváez might give you a little bit more batting average and less power, but I think if you had those three circled as your second catcher, perhaps, and you didn't want to get worse than that, or your first catcher in a real, I'm not going to spend a lot on catcher attitude, then I think you'd be all right. Even Elias Díaz. The one thing about Elias Díaz, I like him better in draft and hold and best ball, just because I think he's going to be a lot more useful at home than he is going to be on the road. I mean, whatever. Thank you for your analysis. Good night.
It's weird to see a player with multiple seasons where he's been a full win below replacement level. Like that is unusual to see for sure, especially as a catcher.
The Rouge Neto door of catchers.
Yeah, that's what you want. I mean, at least he's in Colorado. That does bump up the floor. It's fine where he goes. I think it's really tough to see Alejandro Kirk sitting there wondering if he's going to play enough to actually be undervalued, or if because of their top catching prospect, Gabriel Moreno, being what appears to be big league ready, if that continues to keep Kirk in a timeshare. Davey Jansen's still there.
Yes.
I thought that situation might get resolved with a trade. They made a move for Matt Chapman. We'll talk about that on our next episode. What do you think about Alejandro Kirk's playing time at this point?
I think it's just tough to bet on young catchers, man. They debut later, their offense peaks later. They're asked to do so much in today's game. It's a lot. And so Jansen is going to be the guy that has done the pitching scouting reports and has talked to the pitchers, and the pitchers all know Danny Jansen. They know how to throw to him. Jansen can do some calling, whereas Kirk, you feel like you always got to bring him along quickly. And it's not like he hasn't been without some question with regard to his catching ability, and so I think he's the backup. I don't know. I obviously he could be a better offensive player than Jansen, but I think that might be a true 50-50 split. I'm not as worried about Moreno for the same reasons as like that. I'm a little bit downer on Kirk because I think Moreno has a lot to learn, and in fact, I think Moreno is a potential showpiece in a Jose Ramirez trade that there's been so much smoke around that. There's more smoke today in the news about contacting the Guardians about Jose Ramirez. So I kind of think Moreno is a trade chip. A lot of times players that go to the fall league are trade chips. They're sent there to play in front of scouts. And just given the fact that they have Kirk and Jansen and Reese McGuire, I think that he might be a trade piece. So I don't think Moreno's the problem for Kirk. I think it's just his age. Maybe by the end of the season, he's made it a 75-25 for him, but I don't think I think if you sum up all the plate appearances for the season, it'll be very close to 50-50 for those two.
Maybe a frustrating path to get there. A couple of would you rathers within this cluster, low average, big power guys. Would you rather have Mike Zunino or Gary Sanchez now that Sanchez is in Minnesota?
I'm going to take the chance on Gary Sanchez, and here's my thinking. He's no longer in the spotlight. He's no longer, I think in New York, I think it's a real thing where you get asked about your defense. You get asked about those pass balls. You get asked about this. You get asked about that. Did you cost them? What about your framing? Blah, 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 blah. And that, the sort of talk radio, like sort of just the New York media situation is such that, he's heard about his 204 batting average or whatever. I just don't think that. I think in Minnesota, it's sort of a little bit more set it and forget it, and put him at DH and backup catcher, and no one's going to talk to you about your batting average. So I think he'll the opportunity there for good playing time and maybe even some good use out of him, maybe even some better batting averages. I think that I like that. I think Zunino is just a defensive catcher who's trying to hit a homer every time he's up there.
which, works for him for sure. It brings the consistently low batting average expectation. But
Yeah.
because the team scores a lot of runs, you get a little more in terms of runs and RBIs from Zunino than you might from other players with that exact same profile. Joey Bart sort of seems like a guy that.
Oh, you taking Zunino?
No, I'm taking Sanchez as well. Sorry, I didn't make that very clear. Zunino is like the guy that if everybody else that we've talked about so far in this cluster is gone, then I'm like, all right, fine, I'll take Mike Zunino.
Yeah, if you miss Sean Murphy, and in fact the ADP, I think actually what I said about Vázquez, I think Narváez and Kelly pair better because they're not going to hurt your batting average as much, and then Murphy, Sanchez, and Zunino pair where you want Murphy, but Sanchez is the guy you take if someone snipes you on Murphy.
I wonder if Joey Bart is actually going to be like another Mike Zunino type player. The hit tool is very questionable. The power's legit. Defensively, he's good. The Giants haven't done a lot to change what they have behind the plate just yet. Kirk Casale, I don't think he's ever had more than like 300 or 350 plate appearances before. So it looks like an even split and probably something that favors Bart, barring an outside addition. Hey, maybe they could trade for Sean Murphy, but the Joey Bart dream to me seems like it's not as lofty as it once was. Now the question, I guess, is in typical 2-catcher leagues, are you still comfortable with him at least as your second catcher, given the way that depth chart is made?
No, and I think that this is a little bit like the Kelly situation. I would not be at all surprised if Kirk Casale had more bats this year than you know what I'm saying?
It's possible.
You just had like the best catcher, one of the best catchers of if you're talking complete catching, one of the best catchers of all time. Like I think he's a Hall of Famer in Buster Posey. And you have all these pitchers who love throwing to him, and you have the framing ability and all that stuff. And you have a guy in Kirk Casale who has, caught, let's see here, 405 games, and then you've got Joey Bart who's caught like 15. I don't know. How many has he caught? Dude, it is like 15. 35. You take the guy who's caught 10 times as many games, right? At least in a 50-50. Anytime there's a question of like, this pitcher really needs a good catcher behind the plate, I think you go with Casale.
I think initially, at least, because you don't know what you're going to get from Bart offensively either. Like there's some questions about how well everything fits on the side that has to be good, and then there's the offensive question too. Maybe you score enough runs where your catcher spot doesn't matter. If you're the Giants, that could easily be part of their story this year. But I just think it's weird that I'm not as excited about Joey Bart as I ordinarily would be for someone with this much of a path to playing time who was the second overall pick in the draft just 4 years ago.
It's a bad strikeout rate. And, for all of our talk here about like, strikeout rate's jumping after good ones in the minor leagues, he had a 29% strikeout rate in AAA. It's not that much of a jump to the 30, 33 that he's projected at. I don't know where Steamer gets this 27% strikeout rate.
It's an easy 35%. I think when you think about how weak AAA was last year and how much of a jump it is to the big leagues, it could be mid-30s for the K rate for Joey Bart, barring significant improvement. Totally possible, but you kind of need to see something to believe that there's a reason to project it. The late darts at catcher, Yadier Molina out there outside the top 300. One more year for Yadi. He's probably going to accumulate, probably not going to lose playing time unless he's hurt. So oatmeal of oatmeal. Eric Haas could move around a little bit. I don't think that's a story that has a particularly positive ending, even though he can do some damage when he connects.
The team is going to get better around him, and he's going to get less playing time over time.
Yeah, that kind of worries me a little bit with him. James McCann,
we glossed over Stassi, though.
I like Stassi. Yeah, I think Stassi, he's a good second catcher in a 2-catcher league. He's not necessarily the guy that you want as your one. You're not pairing him with someone else from this group.
One thing I have noticed, though, is that if you do want him, you may need to jump him over the auction calculator number.
Because the StatCast numbers are good.
The StatCast numbers are good. He has a little helium. He'll go in drafts. And if you have Stassi circled as your second catcher, as I have in leagues, then you better have a backup plan. For me, the backup plans have been this is a little bit like there's a big jump here, but I could see these guys being all right. Austin Nola. I think he was hurt last year. You can see that a lot of his batted ball stats, the exit velocity, the barrel rate, all that stuff declined, and he was self-described as hurt last year. So I'm hoping for a better year. And the nice thing is a decent contact rate, probably going to have an okay batting average for a catcher. And I think that's a nice floor to be at. I think Molina can be part of that backup plan. And then really late, I kind of like Torrance.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of catching there, but I don't think that Cal Raleigh really I know that. So a lot of these young pitchers that have come up have been playing with Cal Raleigh, and they love him, and they think he's a great catcher and he's nice to throw to. But I think offensively, the debut wasn't great. And then, once Tom Murphy gets healthy, I think it's Murphy and Torrance. And then to me, Torrance is the guy who has more offensive upside, in that you've seen some years where he's made good contact. You've seen some years where he's had a good barrel rate. And if he puts those two together, he has, I think, the best upside of anybody on the bottom of this list. Because think about it. He's had years with a 10% barrel rate, and he's had years with a 20% strikeout rate, like two of each, not at the same time. But what you're asking to be is like, can you put these two facets of your personality together, please? And if he can, now you're talking about a 22% strikeout rate, a 10% barrel rate. That's going to be a 250, 260 average. That's going to be, 20 homers, 25 homers. Are you going to really start Tom Murphy, who strikes out all the time, over that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where in a mixed league, I'd rather just wait and see who's playing more and try to make the move from the wire as opposed to get it right on draft day. I mean, I think the key difference for me between the Seattle situation and like James McCann is that James McCann should have a 75-25 playing time edge over Tomas Nido. And I know it was a down year for McCann. I think it was reasonably well predicted by projections, but I don't think he's as bad as he was last year either. I think
so you're hoping Torrance doesn't get drafted. You draft McCann. You hope Torrance doesn't get drafted. And if McCann, is showing weak exit velocities or whatever, something early on, and Torrance is playing a lot and not striking out, then you can kind of like jump over.
Right. I think I'm chasing playing time in the second catcher spot if I waited this long with McCann or Tucker Barnhart or even Jacob Stallings, just because I know those guys are going to play, and then I could wait and see which better skilled guy emerge. Like I like Luis Campusano a lot too. How is he going to play a lot in the current construct of the Padres roster?
Noah's hurt. Yeah. The one question I have for you though is playing time good for you when you're this late in the catcher pool?
It's still better than when you're at the bottom of the AL and NL only pool, right? The $1 mono league catchers, I think, actually hurt you. The equivalent $1 mixed league catchers, I think, still help you a little bit. The last of the last starting catchers are still
because you just need every single run in RBI to win your league. You need every single little number you can get.
Yeah, because you're not talking about a seldom used backup who actually hurts you by hitting 185. Like that's right. Not quite the floor that we're looking at here. The other player, the last catcher we should talk about, MJ Melendez. They have Sal. They have a crowd already around first base because you've got Carlos Santana as a holdover, and you've got Nick Pratto on the way up. You got Vinny Pasquantino also kind of emerging as an interesting first base DH option too. I just can't see how MJ Melendez plays a lot unless there's a position option in the mix that I'm not thinking about, or unless they're willing to move on from Carlos Santana. And I'm not quite sure that there's a willing buyer on the other end for Carlos Santana at this point.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of the situation in St. Louis where the manager said, we're going to have one of these guys up between Gorman, Nootbaar, and Yepes to play a lot. And, we're not going to have somebody up that's not going to play a lot, right? Isn't it a little bit like that where like there might be one opportunity in Kansas City? I don't even think there's necessarily one full opportunity because Sal Perez can DH a lot, but let's say there's one opportunity in Kansas City for a rookie to make it. Isn't that going to be Bobby Witt?
I mean, it's definitely Witt first because of where he plays and what they have.
If there are two opportunities, now you're talking about someone who could come up to split 1B DH with Santana. Then it could be Pratto. It could be any of the three you mentioned. and it might actually matter what their spring looks like.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how they would prioritize like where Sal plays. Is he just a catcher and a DH, or do
They've
they
played
start to
him at
break him in at
catcher
first?
for
Like,
so long. I think they just leave him at catcher. And I think it's more likely Prado comes up or Pascantino, but I think Prado's the guy because Santana's gone after this year.
Prado's actually a good defensive first baseman, which we don't talk a lot about first base defense. But if you have this cluster of
They seem
players,
to care about it.
like
They're kind of a defensive team.
play the guy that actually is a good defender there. But at the same time, Prado had a higher K rate at AA and AAA last year than Melendez did. Melendez looks a lot safer in that regard as a hitter. Melendez was running K rates under 22% at AA and AAA. Prado was at 29 and 28% at those two stops. So if you said who's
They
more
are a
likely to hit
contact
right
team.
away,
They seem to most likely like contact guys.
Melendez to me.
And then you just start working Perez at DH and first base.
Right. So I just think the answer has to be saying goodbye to Carlos Santana if they're going to play Melendez enough. And unless you're in an AL only or draft and whole or some kind of keeper league, it's really hard to hold on to Melendez and wait it out. As much as I like what he was doing in the upper levels of the minor
I had
leagues.
a moment in AL labor where the last two remaining corner infielders I wanted at all were Hunter Dozier and Carlos Santana, and I panicked, but I bought Dozier at price, but I paid $8 for Hunter Dozier. My value said he was $8, but I paid $8 for Hunter Dozier because I was terrified of Carlos Santana. I think there's a fair, like, if you're thinking about like drafting him as a AL only first baseman, I mean, he's 35 years old and he's been below average with a stick 2 years in a row, and he's projected to be pretty close to average, which is a good way to lose your job as a first baseman.
Got a lot of really good players pushing for that job behind him too.
Plus what's behind him. And Dozier can play third in outfield, so he's not quite in that problem.
Yeah, I think we got a couple minutes we can squeeze in the UT players here just to get them done, which is fantastic. And that starts with Shohei Ohtani, who could have a episode of his own. But I think the only real Ohtani question that I have, is, what's next when you look at what he was able to do last year? He had, I think, a fair strikeout rate concern. Like it's picking nits in a star, but what comes next when you have a player who's this good, who struck out 29.6% of the time while putting up a 46 homer, 26 steal season a year ago?
I mean, he's such a raw athlete. It's almost unrefined in a way. It's kind of a strange thing to say, but he's raw on the mound. He doesn't have good command, and he throws hard, and he's raw at the plate, where even though he's walking, like he does reach at pitches outside the zone, and he does strike out a lot. So he's like, I think he might be it's kind of strange to say, especially with his body size and how he looks, but he might be one of the top 3 athletes in the game. I mean, he can really run fast, and he hits everything hard, and he throws hard. I think he's an athlete first. And, the nice thing about that is there are learned skills that you get by playing more. For example, as you age, you swing less. It's just, that's a relationship that happens. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily reach less. It just means you swing overall less. He's been swinging at sort of somewhere between a 50 and 45% rate. If he got that down to 41, 42%, it might lead to more walks and fewer strikeouts. I think there's going to be some learned value there. I think he might improve his strikeout rates. Most of the systems say he's going to improve his strikeout rates, but maybe there could be a big jump back to 27 or 25%. And then we would see an even better season from him at the plate, which would be crazy, because it's going to be sort of the thing where, like, can he have a better season at the plate, a similar season on the mound, and then lose the MVP just because people are like, he won it last year?
Any healthy and very productive season from Ohtani is going to be weird in the MVP conversation, because he does two jobs that very, very few players we've ever seen can even do at that level in any capacity, let alone do as well as he has done. So it's sort of like when a dynasty coach wins coach of the year for the first time and then doesn't win it, even though they win 5 more championships. You're like, well, how is that person who's still doing the same great job not the coach of the year again? It's that sort of trap that you fall into. I think with the the athleticism and the fact that he does control the zone well, that gives me some optimism that the K rate's not going the wrong way. It can actually come down a little bit like the projections are pointing to. The batting average floor is probably not any lower than it was last year if the K rate stays where it is because he hits the ball so hard and because he runs well. And I think the thing that works also in his favor, we have Mike Trout healthy right now. We have Anthony Rendon healthy right now. He was able to put up these monster numbers last year with a below average supporting cast for most of the season. And I think that's changed as well. So, it comes back to the typical format questions we've been asking about Ohtani every year since he came over. In a daily moves league where he is one player and you can move him between your UT spot and you can throw him on the days he pitches, he's the first player off the board for me. He's the best player in the pool because no player can accrue nearly that much value, even if he does 80% of what he did as a hitter and as a pitcher last year. He'd still probably be the number one pick in that format. But in weekly leagues where you have
still
to choose,
hard for me to figure out. He's projected to be, a top 5, top 6 hitter, and yet he's got lower plate appearances than anybody else in there because he's going to take days off the day after he pitches. How many hitters do you know that are like guaranteed to take a day off?
Yeah, it's most of the pool gets some days off, but 639 plate appearances for Ohtani. Like, can that number actually go up? I guess if the role is exactly the same,
I think
the
the
health holds
down,
up. Maybe if they're turning the lineup over a little more often, he can get to 650 and repeat because the lineup is better. But he needs perfect health again, and I just think it's really tough to bank on that given everything he's trying to do.
Yeah, and I've had the opportunity to draft him in weekly leagues and passed on it because of the sort of the soft runs and RBI related to the way he's used, and the fact that I just there are other players there with higher batting averages projected, so I don't want it to kind of come out of the first round with a batting average that's lower than what I need to win.
Isn't the Roto profile like Jose Ramirez, but he also pitches? He strikes out more than Ramirez in terms of like the little bit of a concern about average, the big power, the really nice speed, and the great run and RBI counts. Like that is the Jose Ramirez 5x5 replica. It just comes with a K rate that's like twice as high.
And in a weekly league, the pitching might be irrelevant. I mean, when are you ever going to put him on the pitching side? It's only like sort of a safety net where if your pitching's really bad, you might actually tank your hitting a little bit just to have him in there but he's probably not going to ever have a 2-start week. So it's not like you'd be like, oh, it's September, I really need pitching, I got a 2-star week from Ohtani. When was that going to happen?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of thing that you, over the course of the season, you found an excess of hitting elsewhere. Your pitching got torn up by injuries, and you just say, well, I know he's better as a hitter than as a pitcher, but I can't find a pitcher like him on the wire. I need pitching. He's going on as a pitcher. I think you draft him in weekly leagues where he's one player with the intention of only using him as a hitter, barring that sort of scenario, which it's just like I want to be able to unlock everything he does because it's so fun, but we're just not. Our leagues are not built for that in most ways. The other UT only players, always a little underrated, it seems. Franmil Reyes goes around pick 110. Nelson Cruz, who's now a member of the Washington Nationals, going around pick 180. With Reyes, I mean, 0 playing time concerns. This is a Cleveland team that's light on bats, so who's pushing him? And I think we're looking at kind of a Kyle Schwarber-y sort of output, maybe a little higher K rate than you'd like, but hits the ball really hard and should rack up plenty of runs and RBIs to go along with 30-plus homers.
Yeah, I'm trying to find him here. I feel like he's a guy that like shows on my board as he's DH only, so he's not going to show it. Oh, there we go. He's a guy that I feel like he's like sitting on my board for. There he is. Yeah, $17 player. He's sitting on my board forever because like I'm going to take Ketel Marte, who's projected for the same amount. I'm going to take him over him, right? And you can see that he's got this 119 ADP, at least on Fangraphs. I don't know what it is on more updated numbers, but he's ranked among guys who go in the 40, 50, 70 range, He kind of goes like a Justin Turner and a Rhys Hoskins, even though those are the three that are projected for good numbers in that range. And what you see from that is Rhys Hoskins and Franmil Reyes, not great batting averages. You're still trying to protect your batting average when you're picking in the like 70 to 90 range, or in, where he may be going. So he sits there, and Justin Turner is a plate appearance problem, right? So those three will sit there and be values for you for a long time. If you build your team with really good batting average, you can get a really nice value from Hoskins and Reyes by taking him with your sort of 90th pick, which is way after what the value says you should do and before where their normal average pick is.
Yeah, and you could play that game of chicken potentially and get them right around their ADP. Yeah. And there's other alternatives. I do like him quite a bit. I think he fits really well if you're addressing speed early, if you're taking an elite catcher early and you're trying to make up some ground and power. I think it's a really good way to do that at a discounted price because projections seem to like him quite a bit. The projections say he's basically Jose Abreu, just a UT only version, and he's going quite a bit later in most drafts. Nelson Cruz, it's so fun. He's back. Glad he's playing again this year. Little surprised he landed in DC because they just didn't seem like a team that was playing for this season. So why would he go there? But it's a good place to hit.
It's a good place to hit. It's a good place to hit. And one thing that you might not notice, and I wrote this in my 5,000 word omnibus that I now have to add another 1,000 words to because of today. That you look at his years leading up to this last year, and in the StatCast era he's 158 WRC plus, 148, 146, 133, 164, 164, 122. Oh no, this is it. Age has come for him. He's done. Well, guess what? It wasn't 122 all the year. It was in Minnesota 141. Hey, that wouldn't look that weird compared to all those other years. What happened is he went to Tampa and his strikeout rate went through the roof and his walk rate plummeted. And Tampa has those lights, the bad backdrop, the bad batter's eye. And you can see this. Willie Adames is a famous example. It suppresses walks. It increases strikeouts. And I think Nelson Cruz just had a hard time with the new stadium. So, I don't think he's going to have that hard time here comes my phone call.
There it is. Yeah, I don't know why the Trop has to be a poorly lit Applebee's in terms of how it plays, but clearly we have to go. Nelson Cruz, a nice value where he's going, and even still a good value if he jumps up a couple of rounds. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. Be sure to leave us a nice rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you might be listening. You can follow Eno on Twitter at EnoSaris. Find me at Derek Van Riper and get a subscription to The Athletic for just $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. We are back with you on Thursday.
Thanks for listening. Hello.